Good morning. Hi, everybody. Welcome to How to Protect and Govern Your Data whilst using Microsoft Teams. This is one in a series of webinars that we'll be producing over the coming months for your perusal. For those of you new to bluesource, though, just a quick line for who we are. Our mission is to better protect and govern your unstructured data. We help organizations in their journey to Office 365 moving applications into Azure, but whilst at the same time capturing all types of unstructured data from compliance and regulatory requirements. So today, what are we going to discuss today? We're going to cover what is the best route for success in rolling out Teams compliantly. But this is a whistle-stop tour. Classification itself will run in probably another webinar very soon because there is so much to cover. In the room with me, though, we have got Via Mercer, a bluesource chap with 20 years experience building messaging, communication, and more recently data solutions for some of the biggest financial service, legal, insurance, retail types organizations. So welcome, V. We also have from Microsoft, Robert Jan Garretts. So welcome, Robert Jan. Another 20-year veteran in the UC and voice, formerly with Cisco, but the last 10 years supporting the Microsoft Teams team, I should say, account teams, with their links to their customers as well. So what are we going to cover today? The agenda, so teamwork and technology. Liam's going to have a look at the trends and issues that you need to consider in your adoption plans. Robert Yang is going to do a great overview of Teams and its capabilities in the marketplace. I'm going to switch back to VM, where he's going to cover the protect and govern section and cover key steps and processes that maximizes your success for Teams deployment, from building and automating processes to retention, archival, and classification. And finally, VM's going to do another high-level a real-world demonstration of what success can look like. So, VM, over to you.
Thanks, John. Welcome along, everyone. I'd like to take just a few minutes to set the scene for the rest of the webinar and talk a little bit about our experiences helping our clients with modern teamwork. We're living in more and more in a just-in-time world, and what I mean by that is people expect to be able to do things, their tasks, when they want, where they want, on a device of their choice. We're seeing this behaviour change in the way people interact with each other in their personal lives. It's no longer that common to plan outings with friends weeks in advance. The time to plan has reduced as that technology has enabled us to reach more people in a shorter space of time in a more collaborative way. We all jump in a WhatsApp group or tag each other on a Facebook post to arrange a quick meetup. So what's the point of my story? Well, this behaviour trend is finding its way into the corporate world. People expect to be able to collaborate on the fly, and this is leading to business units within departments purchasing siloed collaboration tools, some of which may or may not have been vetted by the IT department for security compliance capability. Now, a lot of people may not necessarily appreciate whether data is sensitive, or they may believe that the information they're sharing is innocuous, because, well, everybody knows this, or what's the harm in sharing it? Things like a building ID or maybe a merchant number, which is on every piece of documentation that goes out, may seemingly be innocuous, but this is exactly what a skilled social engineer is looking for, to be able to blend in and move around inside an organisation to collect that more sensitive data. Now, I'm not really here to talk about social engineering, so let's get back on track. We're seeing lots of disparate tool sets being used across the organisation. Now, some of these are consumer grade, some of these enterprise grade, but they're being stood up and utilised for team working across businesses. And in some cases, business units are influencing those buying decisions and they're working with IT to deliver those tool sets. Absolutely fine. This does add more work to the IT department to vet, manage and support a growing number of apps. And each department may need something slightly different. What's really eye-opening is once you start auditing this behaviour, is that in many cases, the business units are just bypassing IT completely. They're just expensing the software purchases on a credit card and getting on and using those tools to do their job. Now, many of the most regulated organisations have concerns around data residency. Maybe not all of these apps that are being used today for team working are able to comply with those storage demands. And this could potentially then expose us to risk. So even if the organisation is not highly regulated, is it really a good idea to be storing intellectual property in these consumer-grade services? So why is all this change happening? Well, as much as we're seeing more and more need for just-in-time collaboration, we're also seeing a trend in smaller but more widely spread teams. And of course, the continuation of having to do more with less. And what this means is we're having geographically dispersed teams and cross-organisational team working becoming the norm. If the business does not provide relevant tool sets, or actually if it's even worse, if they do provide those relevant tool sets, but don't engage the users on how to effectively use them in a secure and compliant way, we're going to start to see shadow IT creeping in and the proliferation of siloed collaboration tools across the organisation. So as well as these points, we're also seeing more flexible working initiatives across many organisations. What this is doing is relies on technology to plug the gap where a physical office used to be. This can be due to the demands of the users and the people, but actually in some cases it's for cost savings. Real estate is pretty expensive, and so if we introduce these flexible ways of working, we can downsize the physical real estate footprint while still helping to drive business productivity, and that's the vision, right? So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea about modern team working and some of the challenges. I'd like to hand over to Robert Young now, who's going to be talking a little bit more about Teams itself.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ian. So over the next kind of 20 minutes or so, I want to give an overview of what Microsoft Teams is about and how Microsoft actually positions this with our customers. So kind of summarizing what Ian was saying about the changing workplace. So if you compare kind of the modern workplace compared to, let's say, 5 years ago, from a device perspective, we see that people quite often use 4 or even more devices per user. I mean, everybody will have a mobile phone, probably one, maybe something, even 2 laptops, and even probably something like a tablet or something to also work from. If you look at kind of what type of people are working in the organization, then we quite often see that almost up to 5 different generations could actually be working in the same workforce. One other statistic that I put on this slide is about kind of how many people will be working remotely by 2020, and that's actually almost like 3/4 of all the people work in organizations. And if you compare then how many teams you're actually part of compared to, let me say, 5 years ago again, you probably are part of twice as many teams as you were before. I mean, you can imagine about your own kind of teams that you normally sit in within the organization, but also a whole range of virtual teams that are being set up and you're being part of. So in that sense, the modern workplace is very much changing very rapidly. And we as Microsoft have been trying to figure out, how best to address this with our platforms. So that's really where kind of Teams comes in. And although Teams obviously seems like a new type of platform, actually it's built on the existing workloads that we had for a long time already in Office 365, including SharePoint, Exchange Online, etc. And we really see Teams as kind of the hub for teamwork. So that means we should be able to communicate, collaborate, customize and extend, and also work with confidence from that platform. Now, what do we hear from our customers? Well, it looks like we actually seem to hitting the right points there. It seems that our customers say, well, it enables efficient ways of working, and also it helps them to accelerate the decision making. So from that perspective, we have great feedback from our customers. From a Microsoft perspective, we can see that actually it actually is the fastest growing business app in the Microsoft history. As you can see here, a couple of the stats here. We have more than 500,000 organizations already using Teams. And of those, we have actually 150 organizations and more that already have more than 10,000 users within a single organization using it on a large scale. So as I mentioned, also from my perspective, it's really kind of a platform that seems to deliver on what we are trying to look for. Now, when we think about collaboration and teamwork within Microsoft 365, they're kind of on a very high level, in a way, 3 kind of different platforms that you could look at. First of all, we obviously have email, and it's very difficult to get away with email, or get away from email, I should say. And especially if you are communicating with external customers, email is still kind of the choice for many people to communicate internally and externally, actually. From a kind of outer loop perspective, and I know it's kind of more like an American terminology there, but when we we kind of try to communicate with, let's say, the rest of the organization, almost like town hall events, etc., then we really want to kind of position Yammer. And although Yammer might have not been kind of in the focus light for the last couple of years, it's really a platform that we still are very keen on developing further and actually providing a lot of new features on. So when we are talking about trying to kind of communicate with what we call here the outer loop, the Yammer is very much positioned to be able to do that. And then actually that's kind of also then leading us into where Teams fit in. And we really want to position Teams as kind of solution for, or a platform to communicate with kind of the smaller team. So if you are, for example, part of a team within your organization, or maybe of a virtual team, that's really where we would like to position Teams as the collaboration platform of choice. Now, one other way to look at kind of how you communicate and collaborate is, of course, how do you share documents? And this is kind of a slide I put into to show you, probably trying to kind of explain a little bit better on, how as an individual, you might, for example, want to share or work on a document. And probably in that case, you would like to store it in OneDrive. And if you want to share that with some other people around the organization, maybe a couple more, then again, OneDrive would probably be would be one of the better places to do it. But as soon as you start talking about kind of a smaller group of people, or maybe let's say a team, then actually that's where Teams come in. And Teams, as you can see here, together with SharePoint Online, it's pretty much the ideal place to put your team file on. If you then look at kind of communication of a specific file to the rest of the organization, you could think of Yammer. Or if it's kind of a more formal type of communication with, let's say, external parties, you might even want to look at creating a portal. So this is kind of a different way of looking at how you would share and collaborate with your documents. Now, as I mentioned, Teams is actually not is not completely new in the sense that it's actually built on top of all the other workloads that we already had in Office 365. And it actually also is very nicely integrated with a lot of other kind of services that we provide in Office 365. This includes obviously Exchange Online and SharePoint, but also things like OneNote and third-party applications like Planner or Trello. We also mentioned here Stream, and Stream is actually kind of the service that we use for actually publishing and sharing videos. Very nice integrated with Teams again, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So just looking at kind of the different types of modalities we can actually communicate using Teams. Well, the first one that obviously springs to mind is kind of how we would like to help people communicate through chat. That could be in a kind of a formal way where we actually have a team set up with a couple of channels, or it could be in an informal ways where you just want to have a chat or a one-on-one, or maybe you want to with maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people. And again, we have tried to make sure that within Teams we can actually facilitate those different types of communication as part of chat. So whether it's a one-on-one or a group chat, in an informal or in a formal way. And we also have tried to kind of keep it human as well. So if you would like to kind of use emoticons or GIFs and stickers, etc., then we have actually provided that capability too. So the second kind of modality I quickly want to push up here is kind of talking about calling. So if you want to, for example, use your collaboration platform to also provide calling capability, again, we have actually enabled this within Teams. To be able to actually call out to, let's say, third parties, or maybe people on the mobile or how do you call it, a company phone, then you would have to have some way of actually calling out to what we call the PSTN, or the public switch telephony network, which is the telephony network as a whole. In those kind of situations, there are 2 options. One is to actually use the Microsoft calling plans, which is kind of using Microsoft as a telephony platform. Or the second option is to actually use your own telephony provider as you have today, but we call it through Microsoft Direct Routing. And bluesource is very well positioned to actually check this out with you, and which is kind of the best options for you. So in those kind of situations where you have enabled either the Microsoft calling plans or Microsoft Direct Routing, you're able to make calls and call out to anybody outside and inside the organization using the phone. To be able to kind of collaborate in a single workplace, we have made sure that we obviously also integrate everything Office 365. So whether it's kind of the normal Office apps such as SharePoint or Excel and Word, or whether it's kind of the other apps like SharePoint, OneNote, and Power BI. We have tried to make sure that these are all kind of available within Teams, and therefore you don't have to switch to other different applications to be able to kind of use those types of applications. So it means, from an end user perspective, that you can use Teams as a single place to do all this type of collaboration. And then the last kind of modality I want to kind of focus on is really about kind of meetings. And previously, before we actually had Teams in place, we talked a lot about Skype for Business, Skype for Business Online. And we thought we did actually already a pretty good job with actually providing Teams meetings capability within the Skype for Business Online platform. However, we realized that also, if you look from a modern meeting perspective, how there are different types of requirements coming up as well. So, quite often when you're in a modern meeting, meaning the meetings that we are running these days, then they're longer than planned. Sometimes people are showing up straight away, or maybe they're a little bit late. They might actually want to use different types of tools when they are doing those meetings, because there might be different types of meeting as well. And again, that's really where we want to kind of focus on with kind of providing these type of capabilities within Teams. So then, when if we look at kind of a Teams meeting, we have kind of created this kind of journey where before the meeting, you probably want to kind of talk about the insights. Maybe you are already talking to your colleagues about a specific topic. You have already some context, etc. And then you decide to actually plan this meeting. So then during the meeting, everyone will jump on this meeting, whether it's a call or a kind of how do you call it, a video interaction meeting. And then after that meeting, you probably want to be able to kind of review that meeting, play it back, and especially for people that haven't been able to make the meeting, to actually see what's taken as actions and so on. And although we had this capability in Skype for Business Online, we believe that with Teams, we actually have been able to even provide the next step on this journey. So through meetings within Teams, we actually can provide a full, complete meeting solution, whether it's an informal solution or whether it's a complete formal solution where you would like to invite people beforehand. So whether it's kind of, as I mentioned there, spontaneous, external, or many, large to many, or one to many, it's all actually provided within the Teams concept. I mentioned in one of the previous slides that we have also included this service that we call Stream. And the point of that was really to kind of make clear that if you think about Skype for Business Online and you were trying to record a meeting, then you really had to kind of think about how you would like to record that meeting, where it would store it, and how you would actually share that meeting. Now with Teams, it's actually completely automatically taken care of. So when you actually record a meeting, it will actually be stored in Stream, which is kind of almost like a YouTube for organizations to share and provide video content. And you can actually play it directly back within the channel, if you have to set it up within a channel within the team, to the end user. So the whole kind of issue of trying to record calls and distribute calls, the recordings of the calls, I should say, has been made much more easy now. And of course, as you would expect, we should be able to join from a range of platforms and devices. Now, just to kind of come back to how you would set up a meeting. Now, the first one, if you would do it like a formal meeting, just like you did with Skype for Business Online, you can start with an Outlook, you use the Teams add-on and set up the meeting as such. As soon as you click on the add-on, you see the email being populated with the information that's required, so the URL or maybe the dial-in phone number. And just like as you would do with Skype for Business Online, you could join the meeting that way. Now, that's kind of the formal way of actually setting up meetings, and that has been around for a long time. The other way, as I mentioned, is also very much focusing on informal kind of meetings. And the approach here is really that if you are, for example, in a team and you're using a channel where to communicate about a specific topic, and then decide, hey, let's actually quickly jump on a call to discuss this in more detail. It's almost like I'm actually walking through the office and I see a couple of colleagues and say, well, let's grab a whiteboard here and let's collaborate on this. And this is kind of exactly what we're trying to do here. So you can straight away from within the channel set up a meeting to join. Now, if you actually have set up this meeting, then obviously, as you would expect, you can use the normal tools for sharing your PowerPoint, for sharing a whiteboard session, etc. And so, again, in this kind of screenshot I'm showing you, the experience you would have as an end user. Now, after the meeting has taken place, quite often you want to have a quick look at, what did we discuss, maybe later on, or if people even couldn't make the meeting, then in a way they could actually quickly click on the recording here. So the point here is that, whether it's actually you want to look at the recording through stream, or whether you want to play it back directly from the Teams channel, it's both possible. And again, the way we have tried to create a scenario is really like, I'm walking through the office, I see a couple of colleagues of mine discussing a specific topic, saying, hey, that's kind of interesting, I would like to join them. That's kind of the approach that we've taken here with being able to join from a channel perspective. Now, when I pick up the recording and I look at it, then automatically out of the box, we would do is kind of transcribe the meeting as well. So we are able to kind of not only kind of obviously listen and view what's done during the meeting, but also have the description as well in place. And this gives us the capability of them to search for keywords. And so the first thing I normally do when I miss the meeting and actually go back to the recording is type in my own name and see if I actually picked up any actions. And so this is kind of very nicely a tool to be able to pick up a keyword, then actually jump straight away to the right place within the recording to figure out what they were talking about, the specific keyword. So kind of in a way, if you are using Microsoft Teams as a collaboration platform, you probably as an end user would like to have a kind of the option to use different types of devices. And just like we had with Skype for Business Online, again, within Teams, we have made sure we have a whole ecosystem of partners and solutions available to provide devices, whether it's a headset, whether it's a desk phone, a speakerphone, etc., or when it's more like a kind of a room type of device, meaning like conference room phones or conference room systems, and these are all available within Teams. Now, the last point I kind of want to raise is the fact that I don't know if you realize, but in the beginning I was talking about intelligent communications, and the whole reason we changed the kind of almost like the expression of unified comms to intelligent communications, because we would like to infuse as much as we can AI into our kind of solutions. And Microsoft is very keen on actually what we call democratizing the use of AI. And the reason we want to do that is because we believe that AI can provide you with additional insights, be more proactive, and also be more adaptive. So this will really allow us to kind of provide, as I mentioned, insightful, proactive, and adaptive insights to an end user to take the most out of Teams. And using AI, you can only do if you have a lot of data. And so we have a lot of data that we collect as Microsoft, as you could imagine. So we use what we call this Microsoft graph, which is kind of almost like the combined brain of three things like world knowledge, organizational knowledge, and individual knowledge. Because we take kind of in a way the signals from Office 365, from Bing, from Dynamics 365, and even from LinkedIn. And as you can see on the bottom of the screen there, because we are doing and we're having those kind of different types of cloud solutions, we roughly do 450 billion user authentication each month. We have 155 million Office 365 users. And so that, we get a lot of information that can actually help us to provide you with more insights and better collaborate as a result. And this kind of has then translated into a couple of features that we have already added today within the Microsoft Teams platform. So I mentioned about the meeting recording transcription already previously, so I think that's clear. But we also have, as you can see on the left-hand side, the inline message translation. So that means you can actually collaborate with other people around the world, and even they could actually speak in their own language or use their own kind of language to be able to communicate. And by using the inline message translation, you would still be able to understand what they are trying to share with you. So that's kind of the first one. The second one I mentioned about recording transcription. The first one, the mobile companion mode, that's also kind of an interesting situation in our minds. So this actually is the situation where I might actually bring in more than one device into a meeting. So for example, I'm on this call now. I'm using my laptop to be able to share my desktop, my PowerPoint, but I also have my phone in the room as well. And by using the phone, I can actually straight away use my Teams client, or my Teams client, to join this meeting too. The smart thing about the solution, though, is that it actually Teams realizes that it's a second device with the same user credentials, and therefore realize that it still straight away I should really mute my microphone as well as my speaker from the phone perspective. The nice thing now is that I can use this second device, in this case my phone, to actually provide maybe a video shot. So that means I can still kind of share my desktop from my laptop by using the PowerPoint. But if I then decide to kind of use the video capability on my phone, I can do that if I wish. So it really kind of provides you with some interesting scenarios where maybe you want to use 2 or even more devices within a single meeting to provide a better experience from the end user perspective. So that's kind of the first one. And then the fourth one, I think people are probably very much familiar with this person who actually appeared on BBC with his children moving into the screenshot. If we had had blur in that specific time, then we would probably never been exposed to this person with his family, and therefore he might have not been so famous as he is now. So especially things like background blur, even if you, for example, working from home, or maybe sitting in front of a whiteboard that has some secretive information in the background, this will prevent you to kind of share unwanted information with the rest of the meeting participants. And the last one I mentioned there, the whiteboard, is about situations where I'm using maybe, let's say, a classic whiteboard. And the problem, of course, with those type of devices is that as soon as somebody's trying to draw on this device, you can't really see what he draws or he or she draws. And by using, again, AI in the background, we're able to kind of, in a way, make this person transparent. So although this person actually is drawing on a whiteboard with himself in front of it, we should be able to see what this person actually is drawing on the board. So there are a couple of examples just to kind of bring to life what we mean by infusing AI into Teams. All right, this is especially I wanted to share. So, PM, I hand it back to you.
Thanks, Rob. So in this next section, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and best practices and recommendations to deliver secure and compliant teamwork. Before I get going, I'd like to pose 5 thinkers to ponder over as we move through this section. When was the last time you audited or checked if sensitive information was shared externally, either from your intranet or through file servers or maybe through email? When was the last time you audited your proxies and firewall configuration to make sure that they're consistent? How are you reviewing where sensitive information is stored both inside the corporate firewall and across SaaS apps in the cloud? How are you ensuring that data is appropriately protected and retained and available to compliance teams for discovery and then disposed of at the appropriate time? And then finally, how are you detecting and containing lateral movement across your network? So Microsoft Teams, as we've heard, is a highly flexible, integrated and collaborative solution which can benefit any team. However, these are some of the pain points that our clients are coming to us to help solve. In some cases, these are acting as blockers to the rollout and general adoption of Teams. And for others who have already rolled out Teams, they're trying to now retrospectively look at controlling and governing the experience. So let's remember that out-the-box configuration enables anyone to create a team. And this can lead to inconsistent naming conventions. It can lead to inconsistent experiences, and it may lead to duplication of teams as well. So why do we see this duplication? Well, if you create a team and make it private, currently it's not searchable. And so a user may not know that a team already exists for their purpose, and so they go ahead and create a new one, and then that membership list is going to be managed separately. And then, of course, when someone creates a team, they become the owner of that team. And as such, they can delete the team and the data within it. Now, of course, we can protect data against this and ensure that those deleted teams data is still discoverable. But out-the-box configuration doesn't have that set up. So we need to make sure that we're thinking about those things as we roll out teams. So one other point is we can enable guest access. And now that means that external collaborators could have access to that data that's stored within the teams. And is that appropriate? The last one is around app overlap. It's a bit left field, but it is still related. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about the siloed communications and collaborations tools being used across the business. So in some cases, IT has deployed multiple tools because they want specific features from those multiple tool sets. And so by introducing another tool set, there's some concerns around is this going to cause user confusion? Or maybe it already has caused user confusion. And then maybe users are coming to them saying, we give it a Skype, now you're giving us Teams, we don't really know which one to use, you haven't trained us. That kind of leads to the path of least resistance. So people will say, I don't know what to use, I'm just going to go back to what I know best. I'm going to send that document out, I'm going to WhatsApp it, I'm going to email it, and we can worry about versions later. What I'm trying to get at here is there is a pain of inconsistent experience and an inconsistent support experience as well. How can we expect service desk to be able to support and understand every tool set the business units have spun up themselves? So all of these pain points are then wrapped around the headlines. We don't really know what data we've got in the cloud, and we don't know necessarily who it's been shared with and who's now got access to that. So how do we start to address this? So bluesource's answer to this is a 5-step program to deliver secure and compliant teamwork across the organisation. We're going to dip into each of these areas in a bit more detail, but at a very high level, assess your environment. So the apps, the data, the infrastructure, the user stories and the business use cases. Then secure your identities and the platform. So we're talking about Active Directory, talking about the authentication methodologies, cloud app access, secure remote browsing, policies and the platform that surrounds Teams as well. And then automate your team's lifecycle. So automating common business processes helps to drive standardization across those mundane tasks and just leaves people more time to innovate. Then classify your data. I'm not sure I can stress this one enough. Classification of data is one of the most important and beneficial initiatives that any organisation can undertake. I'm going to look at that in a bit more detail later on. And then engage your users. Now, onboarding a new tool set and the training that you provide is and always has been important, but that's not really what I'm getting at here. I'm talking about really engage the users, the business users, from the start of the project through developing those business user stories, the awareness campaigns, ongoing security awareness training, and define those feature and data champions. So let's dip into these in a little bit more detail. So the first step is to assess the environment. That involves understanding what types of apps are being used across the organisation today and how prolific their use is. Now, there's several ways you can do this. You could sit down and review all of your firewall logs and manually pull out all of the data. This is arguably a pretty painful exercise, but it's doable. Or there's tools such as Cloud Access Security Brokers or CASB services, which will allow you to enable an ongoing audit of what apps are being used, who's using them, and how much data is being transferred into and out of those. This also helps to drive our user stories engagement, because we start to understand how users interact with those different applications and can follow this up with interviews with them to understand what business processes are they using those tools for, and how can we possibly look to move those to Microsoft Teams or maybe enhance those experiences with Microsoft Teams. We also need to then understand the current infrastructure capabilities and of course the limitations. So is the local office network good enough? Is the wide area network, the internet circuits, are they all good enough to deliver a great quality of experience to the business? Have you conducted a Teams network readiness assessment? Do you understand what the likely impact will be of implementing Teams and to ensure that the perception is good from the get-go? And then one of the most important tasks is to assess the data before it starts being migrated in. We need to understand for all of those in-scope data sources, the different types of data that are being stored, along with who those collaborators are and whether this is in scope or out of scope for migration to Teams. Now, I understand this clearly could be a huge undertaking depending on the complexity of the environment. So typically we would break this down by business unit or department. But the benefits of handling this upfront is that you're going to be in control of all of your data when the ICO comes knocking. And of course, you can cleanse that data beforehand. So you're not necessarily spending time and money migrating that data if all you really need to do is delete it or maybe archive it. And this, of course, then feeds into our data classification taxonomy design, which we're going to talk about in a couple of steps' time. So the next step then is to secure your identities and the platform around Teams. And the way we do this is through several integrated techniques. First and foremost, does your Office 365 tenant and your wider Microsoft 365 tenant and security practices conform to the current NCSE cloud security guidelines? There's 14 principles that are addressed in those guidelines, and that would be a quick win straight off the bat for any organisation. Now, typically NCSE guidelines are followed by public sector, but actually it's good practice for any type of organisation, any size of organisation to follow. It's going to give you a great security posture and a great defence if a breach does occur. Then, of course, we need to ensure that the team's platform itself has been configured appropriately. So what I'm getting at here is the raft of security policies, messaging policies, calling policies, meeting policies, and access and configuration policies that are available. These all can and should be used to control the environment for the users. And then next we move on to some of the maybe less obvious ways of protecting your identities. First and foremost, we need to protect Active Directory. The AD, roughly 90% of organisations are using AD today as their source directory, and AD does have an open API by design. So if you're inside the network already, inside the corporate firewall, there's many tools on every PC that can be used to potentially attack Active Directory. You may well have seen some of the stats around attackers typically going undetected for upwards of 200 days in a network. There is more than likely at least one breached endpoint in most large organisations. And let's face it, socially engineering your way onto a user machine is pretty easy to do these days. There's a whole raft of techniques to do that as well. The majority of our traditional security tools, and I'm certainly not saying we should get rid of those, and they all have their purpose, but they're not designed to detect or contain these types of attacks. They can't really detect the difference between what is a legitimate user and what is an attacker. So there are some behavioural analytic tools which will then help to analyse that behaviour and alert after the fact, saying this process didn't quite look right, or this identity was behaving in an anomalous way. Fundamentally, that's all happening after the fact. You've already been breached. Potentially, your attacker is already changing passwords on some dormant account somewhere. So we need to make sure that we're not only monitoring that behaviour, but any lateral movement attempts across the network are contained. And we need to do that right in the middle of the kill chain. So I haven't got time to go into that in more detail today, but please do reach out to us afterwards and we can talk about that in a lot more detail. The next thing we need to do is make sure that our synchronized identities in the cloud are secured through conditional access. Why is that important? Well, conditional access enables us to use a combination of app, location, device, and identity to request one or more factors of authentication, and then either authorize or not authorize, as the case may be, access to those apps and, of course, the business data. We could take the stance that we're going to block all access from outside the corporate firewall. Absolutely fine, that's going to work. But, of course, we're still not protected from those internal threats. And the net result of that is that we're diminishing the flexibility and the mobility of teams. That's going to ultimately lead to a degradation in user experience and potentially lead to shadow IT again, as we spoke about earlier. And then the last way I wanted to talk about today of protecting your identities is to integrate remote browsing techniques. This is where browsing is containerized in a secure sandbox, so no malicious content could ever find its way down onto a user's device. One of the many benefits we heard of Teams earlier is that it can be the unified interface to many different apps and services. Now, some of those could be web-based, and probably are. So if we're accessing those websites through Teams, by implementing these remote browsing techniques for those unknown categorized websites, we can make sure we're further protecting the environment from any malicious content. So again, please reach out to us for more detail around that. I haven't got time to go into that in any more detail today. So the next step then in our approach is to automate your life cycle. Automation is a very underutilized, but it is highly flexible and valuable tool in the governance arsenal. If we use efficient automation techniques and technologies, we can make sure that processes are carried out in a nice standardized fashion. So why would we bother automating a process? Well, my view is that if we automate the mundane, we're giving users the time to innovate. Ultimately, that's going to help the business stay relevant. My very high level view of general process automation, but getting back on point, why would we bother with Teams lifecycle automation? Simply, it's all about controlling and standardizing the Teams management process. We mentioned earlier that out-of-the-box configuration says that anyone can create a team, and if you create a team, you're the owner of that team, and therefore you can delete the team and potentially all the data within it as well. We can start to address this by automating the Teams lifecycle. The first step will be to understand what types of templates, what types of teams do we want in the organisation. I'm going to run a short demo later, but let's say we have two types of teams. We need one for client projects, we need one for new investment opportunity. We'd create a template for each of those, build all of the configuration, all of the channels that we need into that team from day one, and then we simply clone that template when we provision new teams in the future. This is going to minimise the effort we need to provision those teams and make sure that everything is nice and standard across the organisation. So there's a number of processes or workflows that we would implement, but the first one would be provisioning. And we typically recommend an approval-led provisioning process. So what I mean by that is a user's going to go and request a new team. It's going to go off to maybe their line manager, maybe the department manager, or maybe the service desk to get approved. So some due diligence can be put around that before it then gets automatically provisioned at the back end. Then, of course, we need to deal with those in-life changes. So I'm talking about adding members to teams, removing members from teams, maybe changing the ownership status as part of the leavers process. So some of the most regulated organisations will automate as much as possible and add lots of levels of approvals and reviews for those checks and balances. Any organisation is going to benefit from this approach. You may not want to add too many levels of approval in there to make sure it's a nice seamless experience for the end user as well, but we're still maintaining that governance. And then to round this off, we would need to deal with the archiving and, of course, the disposition of teams and the data within it. So it could be that at the end of an investment opportunity review, we need to archive that data and then retain it for 5 years with an automatic disposition at the end. So it's going to get deleted. Maybe it's going to get flagged for disposition review. We can do all of those things right within that workflow itself. For those organisations that have deployed teams already, this will likely resonate well, and I hope it does, because you've probably already experienced that teams flow, the duplication of teams, and using that kind of free-for-all approach. For those organisations that haven't gone on that journey yet, this is a great opportunity to get ahead of the game. So the next step then is to ensure all of the data is classified as it's being migrated into teams, and of course during the life cycle of that data within the team's environment. Why do we bother with that? Well, classification has huge benefits for the organisation, both for security and compliance. It's really beneficial for the risk and compliance teams during those times of litigation. It makes data nice and easy to find. So when we're talking about classification of data, I'm really talking about either manually or automatically, again, ideally automatically, scanning that data to understand what type of data it is. For example, does it contain passport numbers? Therefore, it's PII. Does it have national insurance numbers in it, credit card information, driver license numbers, and so on? Or maybe there's something proprietary that we need to look for and classify in a certain way. Once we've classified that data, we then need to label it appropriately. Now, across Microsoft 365, there are two types of labels, retention labels and sensitivity labels. They are used for different purposes. We're going to go into that in a bit. So let's say we've classified our data as containing passport information, so it's PII. We could then apply a retention label that retains that data for a year, after which time it's marked for disposition review. What would be the point of that? Well, this type of data is somewhat transient, belongs to an employee. It's good practice to ensure this is kept up to date. So by flagging that after a year, we can make sure that our process says, go and check if this data is current, go and check it's still required, and then act appropriately. And regarding retention, we tend to build automation into the strategy. So use default retention policies that then get overridden based on either the content, either manually or based on an event happening. As mentioned earlier, we can also use labels for protection. So when we're talking about protection of data, I'm really talking about putting some rights management around that. Maybe limiting the use of exporting that data, do not print, do not forward for an email, and of course encrypting that data as well. So going back to my previous example, we may want to assign a sensitivity label to that piece of data that contains passport information, which then encrypts the data and limits access to the HR department only. Then we can use that same label with our data loss prevention techniques. The label itself is stored just as metadata on the data. So wherever you happen to move that data, that is available and can be used in those tools. This can even extend to non-Microsoft cloud storage in some circumstances, and even on premises in some circumstances as well. And then finally, on data protection, we really mustn't forget backup. So maybe the default data backup provision is good enough for you across the Microsoft 365 stack. Maybe that will satisfy your BCP, or maybe not. Either way, you need to think about it. It needs to be defined and documented. And again, reach out to us for more information around the options there. And then when thinking about the data governance capabilities, by classifying and labeling that data, we're making sure that we can retain it for the appropriate amount of time. So we don't want to be keeping data for longer than necessary. That could open us up to unnecessary risk during those times of litigation. And of course, we certainly don't want to be deleting data that must be kept for regulatory reasons. So we must ensure that there's a robust retention schedule and label taxonomy across the organisation and across our data. Then at the end of that retention period, we can simply purge the data or mark it for disposition review, where a defined group of users or people can decide whether that data is needed or whether it just needs to be deleted. We could even use some sort of automation in there as well, and of course we would recommend that you do automate as much as possible. So to give you an example of that, I've been working with a client recently. They deal with a lot of contractual information. Those contracts must be kept all the time the contract is alive, but as soon as the end of that contract comes, it needs to be kept for 10 years and then deleted. And so we could have an event-based label defined so that when the contract ends, you simply trigger the event, all of the data gets relabeled with a 10-year retention clock and marked as records, which means that nothing can be modified. And then the whole process is taken care of automatically. And then finally, one of the other benefits to classifying your data appropriately is that discovery becomes much easier. So when we're building out our e-discovery cases within the data investigations tools in Microsoft 365, by classifying and labeling that data, we can search for those labels within the tools themselves. And that means if we're sure that we've labeled and classified everything correctly, we don't necessarily have to run full index searches every single time. Now, of course, we will probably want to run periodic reviews to make sure that everything is being labelled appropriately. And of course, there's tools to help us with that as well. So anytime we can reduce the data sets that we're having to send off to the legal teams, it's potentially going to have a cost saving. And really, I've been talking about data discovery across Teams and across Microsoft 365. If you're looking for a single pane discovery tool to return data across multiple data sources, then there are some tools available that can help with that as well. I don't have time to go into those today, but please do reach out to us. We can discuss that in a bit more detail. Finally, in this section, then, there are a whole raft of tools provided within the platform which can assist with data governance. These range from label analytics, which show us where labels are being applied across the organisation, through to the e-discovery portal and data investigations capabilities. This is going to allow us to walk through the process of running a data investigation, right from the content search through to putting that data set on hold, moving it into an evidence locker, and then reviewing and redacting that data. Finally, we can export that out for external review or maybe shipping off to legal counsel. And of course, we can keep logs of all of our audits and get quick access to the Microsoft external third-party audits through the Compliance Manager. And I've merely had time to brush the surface of the capabilities today. So again, please reach out to us for more information around that. So getting on to the final step then, the final step in our process is to engage your users. This has to be done from the start when we're planning the user adoption strategy and building out our user adoption plans. We need to understand what those user stories are, what the use cases are, and how we're going to be marketing this to the business. This probably will involve some sorts of workshops or interviews with business users and business user representatives, and spending time with the users to understand how they work, which tools they use, and which tasks we're likely to migrate to Microsoft Teams environment. We need to ensure that we build a robust awareness campaign to make sure people understand not only that new ways of working are coming, but why, what's in it for them, why should they care about security and compliance. And when it comes to security compliance, it's not enough just to run training sessions. We need to ensure that we're delivering easy to consume, relevant content that goes beyond technical training. So for example, what could a social engineering attack look like? How does a social engineer use a seemingly innocuous piece of information to compromise an organisation? And what could the ramifications be for that? Why you shouldn't give out any information to anybody unless you absolutely know them or you have prior authorization. It may be perfectly legitimate, but it only takes once to compromise an organisation. So to get back on track with Teams though, We do need to ensure that the awareness campaign builds that desire to use the new tool set, which is only going to happen with the right levels of engagement. We need to use feature champions and data champions to ensure we help drive adoption and ease the integration of these new ways of working across the business. And then, of course, user engagement is an ongoing initiative. It's not a one and done approach. If we treat it as a one and done approach, we're going to slowly slip back into old habits. So what we're trying to do here is encourage the fostering of new habits focused around Microsoft Teams. If we follow these few simple guidelines, then this should lead to fewer occurrences of shadow IT in the collaborative space, as you're giving the tools to the users and you're engaging them correctly. So I'd like to show you a short demo of what I've just been talking about. And this is going to be focused around the lifecycle automation. So I'm going to jump into the Office 365 portal, and I'm logging in as Megan today. And this is going to take me straight in, as I've not set up any MFA on that particular screen. But then I'm going to launch Teams, and what I've done here is set up some conditional access. So when I launch Teams, it's going to ask me for a second factor of authentication, and this is all configurable. You can set this up however you want to. So I'm going to use my mobile just to approve that request. And that's going to take me into the Teams web client in this example. So down the left-hand side, then I've got a number of teams set up already. Some of these are general teams, and then I've got one at the top for Contoso, which is the name of my company, which is an organisation-wide team, which means that everybody gets automatically added to that team. I've set up a channel for Contoso resources, and I've got a number of tabs where we're going to start adding those resources for our users to use. So I've created a request a new team tab, and this is going to take us to a list that I've published there. This is going to show me all of the teams that are currently in the environment, and I can request a new one. When I request a new one, it's going to bring a simple form up where I can add the title, description, choose a specific template. So we talked about different templates earlier. And then I can choose whether this is a private team or not, and add the members in. So I'm not going to fill this one out. What I want to show you is what the mobile experience is going to be like, or what the mobile experience could be like. I'm going to close this one down, and we're going to switch over to the mobile. What I've done here is created a very high-level basic Power App to give you an understanding of what that could look like. If we go ahead and launch that, you'll see that I've created a nice functional Power App for requesting and viewing existing teams. So 2 buttons on there, one to request a team, one to view a team. Let's go ahead and view some teams. And this is going to give us a search bar, but also I can scroll up and down through all the different teams that exist. But let's go and request a new team. So this gives us a form, exactly the same form that we have in the web experience. So we've given a nice consistent experience for users, no matter which device they choose to use. Let's go and add a title, Project 87546 in this example, and we'll give it a nice description. And then we're going to select a template. And again, it's the same templates that we saw earlier. I'm going to choose project in this example. And then toggle the switch to say this is a private team. I want this to be a closed team. And then we simply just add the members that we want. So in this example, I'm going to add Megan. This is searching your Azure Active Directory. It's going to find everyone that's in your global address book. And I'm going to add Alex as well. Once you're happy with the details, then we can click the check mark at the top, and that's going to go and request that team be created. This is now going to jump through an approval process. So if I go and view that request, we can see the status. I'm going to search for my project. There it is. And if we open the details of that up, we can see that the request status is pending approval, and everything that we typed out is in that request. So let's jump into the approver's email. So you could do this through the Flow app, which is the better way to do it, but I'm going to show you the email example here today. So in this case, we've sent an email to an approver, and within that email itself, it's given us all the details, or the high-level details of what's been created. So it's requested by Megan. There's a little bit of information about it, but there's also a link then I can click on to go and have a look at the details in a bit more detail. So once we're happy with all of this, we can check, do our due diligence, change any settings that we want to, and then once we're happy, we can close this down, go back and approve the request. So let's just close this down and let's go and approve this. So it's always good practice to give an approval reason. We're going to add in that this request is approved and submit that. So once that's been submitted, in the background, that team is going to be created automatically from here on in. So if we jump back into the user experience and log back in as Megan, we should see that that team is getting created for us. You might just have seen in the bottom right-hand corner, it's popped up and said you've been added to a new team. But let's refresh this page and just have a look at the team that's been created. There we go at the bottom, project 87546, and the request status is approved. That tells me that that's been approved and it's gone through and created that for us. We jump back into the main Teams interface. We can see there's the team. It's added me to that team automatically, and all of my channels are created automatically for me. So I haven't now got to go and set up all the different channels and everything in there. We can add as much capability around this as we need. But the idea is we've got a nice standardized team environment, which we can then just use and start uploading our data to. So the next thing I wanted to talk about very quickly is that as well as not being able to, as well as having a standardized team, you can also see that there is no delete option. So I can't delete this team afterwards. So standardized, governed, and protected, all because we're using the automated workflow to do that. So let's jump into another team example. I've got a commercial lending team here, and I've got a risk channel. We're going to go and have a look at some of the files that are in there, and I want to show you some of the classification information in there. So I'm going to go open that up in the SharePoint view. Again, this is all going to single sign you on, be automatic. We can see there's a bunch of files in there, and they've got a retention label of confidential. Now, in my example, confidential means it's kept for 7 years. So if I go and try and delete that file, we should see that it's not going to allow me to delete the file, and I get an error message, which is expected. So by labeling that data, we're able to put some protection around it and retention around it. Let's go and create a new file. So in this particular team site, I've created a couple of templates. Go ahead and open up the risk assessment template. So this isn't just a blank document now, this is now a template that I can just go and fill out. So we'll give it a name. I'm going to relate this back to my previous example. We're going to call it risk assessment, and this is for project 87546. And then let's add some content. And as we're typing, then the system is auto-saving in the background. So that's just a little bit of content to give us an example. Let's go and close that down. But what we can see there is that document is automatically labeled. So it's been classified and it's been labeled with the appropriate retention label. So the next thing I wanted to show you is we can use that label to help us with data loss prevention. If I pick another file that's in this area and go and have a look at the properties of that file, we can see that this, because we've labelled it as confidential, it's telling us that the document contains potentially sensitive information, and of course that means we can't share it externally. So we're now protecting it from being shared outside the business as well. Let's go and actually try that. I'm going to try and share this with an external account. And in this example, I'm going to try and share it with a Gmail account, just so it's completely outside of my organisation. And once we try and do that, right within the sharing window itself, it tells me this data is potentially sensitive. You can't share it outside of your organisation. So we're making sure that we're protecting that data at all times. And this is due to us using those labels. So if we could absolutely do this without using labels, but it does become more difficult to do. So once we've classified and labeled all of our data, everything else just kind of falls into place and becomes nice and easy to do. So that's everything that I wanted to show you from a demonstration perspective. I guess the key takeaway is to start simple. So I've shown you a lot of information today, but start simple. Don't try to do everything at once. Deliver a program of change to step to the desired behavior. And if you do nothing else, then make sure you automate that team's life cycle. That's really all I had to talk about today. So thanks for listening to me. I just want to leave you with one final thought. Microsoft Teams, as part of a modern team working strategy, is really second to none in how it integrates to the device and, of course, the surrounding productivity tools. And as long as you put a little bit of thought and a little bit of planning up front, it can be a highly flexible and collaborative environment, which just lets the business get stuff done in a secure, compliant way. So on that note, I'm going to hand back to John.
Thank you, Vim. Some really good from yourself and Robert Yan. Thank you very much for your inputs there. So just to summarise, as you can see up on the screen, there's some health checks, some quick starter packages we can put together for you. We talked about our team's 5-step program, but where bluesource can help with, if you take away these last few reminders, identity protection, we can secure through conditional access, multi-factor authentication, Active Directory, threat detection, cloud access, security brokerage, and web isolation. Teams lifecycle automation, automate the common process to ensure governance. Data classification, classify your data hosted in Teams. Data retention, use the classifications to retain data appropriately. Talk about data protection, use the classifications to apply protection such as rights management and encryption. Data loss prevention, use classifications to implement a robust DLP program for your sensitive data. And finally, then the team's policy planning, plan and implement effective teams policy to control the platform usage. So my name is John Ford, Sales Director here at bluesource. It's been a pleasure to host you. Reach out to your account team here at bluesource to discuss where you are on your journey and how we can help. And if anyone's interested, Australia are 71 for no wicket in the Cricket World Cup. So have a great day. Thank you for attending, and we'll speak soon. Bye-bye.